last time I was here, I talked about how great Half-Life 2 was. Physics, lip sync, yada yada yada. Something you didn't hear me mention, though, was the multiplayer mode. Probably because there wasn't any. The gaming community is at a weird state where we're demanding developers actually not waste their time with multiplayer and just focus on the core game. It wasn't that long ago that developers required every first-person shooter to have their own tacked-on multiplayer mode, even if the original game sold fine without it. Anyone remember BioShock 2? Yet Valve bucked the trend by releasing their multiplayer mode after the core game shipped and allowing consumers to buy it separately from the single-player game, something I wish most developers would actually do. As for the game itself, it's not very memorable. It's your standard team versus team deathmatch where one team tries to get the most points by killing more players on the other team, or just a straight-up free-for-all, but with the use of the Source Engine's physics and the signature gravity gun. The novelty wears off rather quickly, though it's one of the few games where you can take out a friend with a flying toilet. Another freebie Valve released in early 2005 was Lost Coast, a deleted level that Valve could never quite fit into the main game. Now it's a standalone tech demo designed to show off high dynamic range lighting in the Source Engine. Of course, Valve didn't stop there with their new game engine. They already had a slew of other games lined up to fill the multiplayer void. Counter-Strike Sourced, Day of Defeat Sourced, and the oft-delayed Team Fortress 2 Hatless Edition. You'll probably notice most of these are sequels to mods for the original Half-Life itself, as I talked about in the previous mod episode. Yeah, it's been, 3-4 minutes since we started this video, and only now do I get to the title topic. Valve basically continued their trend of embracing the user community and putting out tools for people to create and, in some cases, sell their own mods using the Half-Life Source Engine. One of the first mods I remember going retail was a title called The Ship, sort of a Clue meets The Sims multiplayer murder game where players are passengers on a boat tasked to kill another passenger while avoiding their own assassin. The retail version had a semi-decent single-player campaign, but overall was very forgettable. Until Assassin's Creed Brotherhood came along and kind of copied the gameplay. But the one big mod that went retail with the Source Engine was a little experiment called Gary's Mod. If you've seen one of those pictures online with the distorted Half-Life 2 character models, this is where it came from. Gary's is ostensibly a physics sandbox mod, which lets players access the resources of various Valve games and manipulate them, warp them, or create their own content in game modes. It's got that weird Minecraft vibe where you're just given tools to build stuff with and no direction, so you're free to play around and invent your own fun. It eventually went retail, and while I'm not saying it's bad, it's not really my thing. It feels more like a tool set than a real game. Plus, once you've seen someone do something lewd with the female character models, it starts to lose some of its charm. Also, remember my nod to natural selection in the Half-Life mod episode? They've recently gone retail as well. I've only played a few rounds, but the strategy elements have been streamlined and the action feels a bit quicker paced while maintaining that dark alien-esque atmosphere. I don't think it's worth the full $25 price tag unless you were really into the first installment. And since it is a retail product, I won't be covering it in this episode anymore. Like last time, everything I mentioned from here on in will be free mods. Anyone can play these as long as you own one Steam game that uses the Source Software Developers Kit. Check the Tools tab in Steam, and if it's there and installed, you're good to go. Now, let's begin at last with... It seemed appropriate for me to start with the most Half-Life 2-like mod. In Minerva, the player character is a recently unconscripted member of the Combine, liberated by a resistance hacker who has flown you to a remote island occupied by the Combine to figure out what they're up to. This one should be easy enough for people new to mods to enjoy. It's more Combine shooting action with a slightly higher difficulty curve and no gravity gun at your disposal. What makes Minerva stand out is the awesome level design, creative but not impossible puzzles, and a surprisingly good story with complex writing. The player receives one-way messages from the hacker directing them. As an ex-Combine, your character is trusted neither by the Combine or the Resistance, and the hacker seems especially resentful to you at first. As the plot develops and the stakes are raised, your invisible assistant grows sympathetic to your plight, but still takes every opportunity to remind you there's still a job to do. Minerva is a good starting point if you're new to Half-Life 2 mods or just want some more action similar to the core game but minus the gravity gun. It's also worth noting that the mod's creator, Adam Foster, got a job at Valve thanks to this mod, and Valve just released it in a special Director's Cut package for free download through Steam. Overall, highly recommended. So while Minerva was light on the physics and heavy on the action, research and development goes in the opposite direction. You play a Resistance member trying to defeat his enemies with the power of science! The gameplay is largely puzzle-based as you use what's in each lab to defeat or bypass the obstacle inside. While you fight off several Combine soldiers, you never use a real weapon. Instead, you do things like move an antlion through a maze so you can make it fight the soldiers for you, or find a way to drop a heavy crane on an enemy APC. Think of it as a proto-portal, but with a more immediate threat of evisceration. The final chapter has you build an A-Team style armored escape vehicle equipped with a spinning death blade on the front, which you eventually use to fight a Strider. I'm at a loss for words. This is stupid and awesome at the same time. If this doesn't sell you on the game, nothing else I can say will. Just one word of warning. If you have trouble with color puzzles like I do, you'll probably want to keep a walkthrough up in your web browser. If there's one thing I've really loved about the last few years in game development, it's that there's been a surge in non-traditional storytelling through interactive gameplay. Dear Esther isn't a game about action or adventure, but story and exploration. You begin on a deserted island somewhere around the British Isles. A narration kicks in as you explore, weaving a tale about loss, sadness, and death. I think I made that sound a lot more emo and depressing than it is. You're not given the whole story, so the player is forced to draw their own conclusions as the game progresses.
Dear Esther, I have now driven the stretch of the M5 between Exeter and Bristol over 21 times. But although I have all the reports and all the witnesses, and have cross-referenced them within a millimetre using my Ordnance Survey maps, I simply cannot find the location. You'd think there would be marks to serve as some evidence.
While this may not sound exciting compared to the last two mods, this is worth checking out because it's a bold experiment in telling a story without action or puzzles. The player is free to explore the island, even though there's only one path to progress the story, and the landscape presented is really beautiful for the limits of the source engine at the time. The path isn't entirely clear and it's easy to get lost, which is made more annoying by the game limiting the player to a slow walking speed. Still, if you want to try something different in the medium of interactive storytelling, Dear Esther is a must-see. Now, you might be crying foul because there are actually two versions of this game available, the original free mod and the recent retail remake. I have both, and while the retail is a much better product with even more astonishing visuals and a much tighter narrative experience, the free version is still out there and is no less worthy. Just consider this a bonus free to 10 episode and recommendation of the retail version.
And then one day something very peculiar happened. Something that would forever change Stanley. Something he would never quite forget.
If Dear Esther sounds a bit too heavy and slow for you, this one should appeal to you more. The player assumes the role of Stanley, who, according to the omnipresent narrator, is a rather dull office worker until his computer stops working and he is forced to leave and explore his office. Finding the building to be seemingly deserted, the player has to make choices for Stanley, branching the story into many different directions.
When Stanley came to a set of two open doors, he entered the door on his left. This was not the correct way to the employee lounge, and Stanley knew it perfectly well. So he turned left at the first open door and walked back in the right direction.
Like Dear Esther, there's no action to be found, and the focus is on story and exploration. But whereas the former was focused on a much more linear form of exploration and storytelling, the Stanley Parable is about choice, or at least the illusion thereof. Depending on if you choose to follow the narrator's advice or to break off into new territory, the story can alternate between tense paranoia to absurd humor and many fourth-wall breaking moments. The narrator, played by Kevin Brighting, is an absolute joy to listen to, even as he berates you when you try to break the game.
Oh, Stanley. You know, you really aren't going anywhere, and I don't say that deceitfully. I truthfully mean that there isn't a story down here. The story was back up where I told you to go in the first place. Right now, you're just running around looking at empty halls, and frankly, that's perhaps even more infuriating for me. So why don't you throw me a bone, give me a chance, and just let me tell the story I want to tell,
However, since the focus was on story rather than aesthetics, the levels are rather bare, blocky, and unrefined. But have no fear, the original creators are already hard at work on the Stanley Parable HD remix. While it isn't finished at the time of this video, it's already been greenlit on Steam, and the producers have released some hilarious promotional material you can check out in the meantime. So, that's enough of the experimental mod, let's get back to some more familiar territory with... Yeah, sure. Okay, so if you haven't heard about it, this is basically a mod that aimed to recreate Half-Life 1 from the ground up using Half-Life 2's graphic engine. Valve inspired this mod themselves with Half-Life Source, a bonus included in the collector's edition of Half-Life 2, which was just a straight-up port of Half-Life 1 running in Half-Life 2. Apart from some different water effects with some basic shadows, the game was largely unchanged and felt no different. Thus, the modding community set out to rebuild the content and story of Half-Life 1 with new character models, improved graphics, and redesigned levels. Ambitious, yes, and what they showed looked really good. Then the group making it went dark for almost 3 years. It's frustrating how often this happens with big online projects, like the Sith Lord's Restoration project I mentioned back in my KOTOR 2 review. They set the bar too high, they try to make it perfect, and then it just never comes out.
It came out 6 months ago!
What? Wait, who said that? Well, this is embarrassing. When I started writing this series last year, Black Mesa looked to be dead and quiet, but as you can see, they finally finished what they set out to do. Recreate Half-Life 1 with all new resources of the Source engine. And I have to say, they have exceeded all expectations. While there have been a lot of gameplay and cosmetic changes, it feels like coming home again. All the old familiar levels are recreated with a loving attention to detail, feeling new and old at the same time. Black Mesa feels alive, thanks to the improved graphics and interactivity of the NPCs.
Look what you did! Holy shit, I can't believe what you did!
Look what you did! Can't believe what you did!
Even Dr. Kleiner and Dr. Vance make an appearance, though without their original voice actors, of course. The biggest change to the gameplay, besides the introduction of physics, is the action has been ramped up in difficulty. Enemy soldiers aren't quite as bullet-resistant as before, but now neither are you, making the firefights faster and more intense. The experience isn't entirely complete, though. The game ends just as Gordon makes his trip to the alien border world, but the developers have promised they are working on finishing them as soon as they can. Overall, my hat is off to the team behind this mod. If you loved either of the Half-Life games, this is a must-play.
And now for something completely different.
It's time for the real nightmare to begin.
I discovered this mod shortly after playing Fear 2, a very disappointing attempt at a horror shooter. Compared to Fear, Nightmare House 2 was a genuine breath of fresh air. While it's a sequel, the original was just a spooky house in the woods filled with zombies map, included here as an optional prologue, but doesn't impact the game itself too much. The player finds themselves in a remote, rundown mental hospital following a car crash, plagued by visions of a dead woman haunting you. The hospital is soon filled with zombies, nightmare creatures, and other supernatural entities as you and the referentially named Dr. Romero try to escape. At the start, it looks like just another zombie survival horror game with a splash of spooky ghost girl from The Ring/Grudge. But things take a right turn into Crazy Town before too long. The game builds a dark, foreboding atmosphere and mixes survival horror with the traditional jump scares, but also some moments of downright mindfuckery. It gets to the point where you're not sure if something is messing with your mind or you really are going insane. The balance is upset a bit when a SWAT team arrives to locate something in the asylum and decide to let the armed-to-the-teeth inmate tag along. These sections of squad-based combat are decently paced and balanced enough that they never upset the haunted house tone of the game, and provide a bit of break from the tension. Until things start getting spooky again and your new allies start getting picked off by the asylum's horrors. The level design could be a bit more polished and the voice acting could be a lot better, but overall Nightmare House 2 comes with a very high recommendation from me. It's a good balance of horror and action, and it's just the right amount of mindfuckery to keep you tense and trying to anticipate the next scary scene. Well, I hope that gives you a few good starting places for exploring the Half-Life 2 modding community. As for myself, I'm working on a little gift for the Z-Man. Next time we're going to talk about the final chapter in this game series, the episodes. So until then, I'll see you later.